And we should be live. Hey Daniel, how are you doing?
Hey Pascal, pretty good. And you, man?
I'm good. So
Awesome.
hello everyone. So Pascal and Daniel here. Coming to you with the Threat Researchers Live, episode 7 for January 28th in the new year 2021. Um, and we all know that the year started as it ended in 2020, so there were no big surprises when we changed. We
And
all
2021 started off with a boom.
Yeah, it's been quite busy, so we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah,
But first, Daniel, you look much better than in 2020. I
I know.
remember
I
you
left the
looking
ghost
like
behind.
this. Although you're a bit frozen, yeah. Sometimes your cam is still freezing up, but
It's
it
like
looks
Casper
already.
the White Ghost there, man, for sure.
Yeah, it already looks a lot better. It's not Casper. So at
No
least we,
lames allowed.
yeah. So at least we fixed something for this year.
That's
It
awesome.
it's a good start, right?
Very cool.
So without further ado, so we have a long list of topics, and let me actually get my list. Where did I put my list of topics? Sorry about that. Here we go. So today we're gonna talk about DNS over HTTPS, which has been back in the news. It seems like the NSA has found out that the DoH is over there, even though that browsers have been supporting it for quite some time. I don't remember when exactly, but I think it's more than a year. Daniel, do you remember when this started?
I think Firefox was the first to start it. I think when it was about a year and a half ago, they start rolling it out publicly in their browser.
Yeah, so it's not like it's something new, but all of a sudden the NSA thinks that they need to talk about it. Um, and for good reason, by the way. Those are points that we mentioned already in a couple of discussions with customers and also with other people on webinars. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Then we're also going to talk about reflection attacks. Then about the what has an impact from DOH is of course DNS. So we're going to talk shortly about remind you what is DNS, how does DNS work, what kind of attacks are usually used by bad guys on DNS because DNS, yeah, it enables the internet. Without DNS, there's no internet. But at the same time, it's a blessing for attackers in multiple ways, and especially for the DDoS threat landscape. We're also going to talk about the ransom DDoS. So we're going to give you an update on new things that we found on the DDoS extortions. Looks like a new tactic from the attackers. And Daniel will also talk about surging Bitcoin and what the impact is on the threat landscape. He wrote a cool blog about that, and I want him to share his opinion on that. Then we also going to talk about, yeah, how can we not SolarWinds?
Yeah, you can't leave
It's
that out.
yeah, it's hard to leave it out. Although we're gonna spare you all the drama and all the history and story. Just what you need to know, or better, what we know and what we remember from it, and what we use in our daily lives to be able to assess the risk from it. Then we will talk about past the cookie attacks, which is something. Yeah, it's quite quite an old attack, but it came up again,
Yeah.
and now it was the CISA. Yeah, it was not the NSA, but it was CISA now that starts talking about pass the cookie and how it relates to multi-factor authentication, and so we're gonna talk about that as well. And then I know a topic that is close to Daniel's heart is the FSB that's warning about US cyber attacks. I'm sure that Daniel has an opinion on the FSB and the US.
Yes, always do.
Okay, and I hope you can share it in public. It's not really an
Yeah,
issue for you.
we'll stay a little reserved, but yeah, we'll have some fun with that topic
Okay.
for sure.
Yeah, some topics might be surprising to Daniel because we're not always syncing up before we start. We're just adding topics at the last minute. There's so many things happening right now. It's been hard to keep track of everything that has been happening. Daniel came up with some things that I said, well, when did that happen? And vice versa. So we're in a new
Yeah, it's
year, but it's really accelerating. So Daniel, your opinion, yeah.
I was just going to say that, there's more and more gray noise, as we had talked about with one of our cyber predictions last year, is that there's just going to become more noise, more scanning, more everything, right? And when you look at it in a social context, there's so many things that are going on and people are talking about so many different subjects that it's almost impossible to keep up everything. I mean, I have filters that look for certain keywords and certain things that are happening on different social media sites, and I'm missing key events because people are talking about things so often. Like, for instance, there's a new RDP UDP reflection attack, right? And this was largely missed in a
Yeah,
way because people were
I
too
also
busy talking
forgot it.
about. Yeah, I mean, we don't have it in our lineup here, but just in general, I want to talk about that for a second. It's interesting
Hmm.
how this information was largely missed by the community because we were focused on talking about DDoS guard. The people that are trying to keep up Parler, and it's it's interesting now that you have so much noise and so many things going on, and so many talks happening, and attacks are happening on top of each other that it's almost impossible to keep up with things nowadays. You need to have a large security team with a number of people on there, keeping up with different things because one person just alone cannot keep up with everything that's happening right now.
Yeah, clearly. I'm feeling like I'm losing ground as well. I used to be able to keep up very well, but the last couple of months everything has been accelerating. The
Yeah.
news and also the news surrounding cyber. It's not only cyber. Now, before we continue, I want to talk about the chat. So, for those who are joining us live, we have the chat open. So, if you have an opinion, if you have a question, if you have a remark or feedback, or you just want to say how good Daniel looks, we'd be happy to see you in the chat. So nobody. Sorry, Daniel.
That's cool. We're in lockdown. It's not like we can do anything.
Okay.
Can't go to the bars.
I can make you green next time. Maybe they like you better then.
I'll be the angry Hulk. Oh, stop messing with my botnet.
All right, yeah, we've seen that one. Um,
Yeah.
so DNS over HTTPS. So our first topic. So this was January 14th that the National Security Agency put out a note. I think it was a note on how to adopt encrypted DNS in enterprise environments. And yeah, there's something to say about DNS over HTTPS. So DNS, as I said, it's fueling the internet, but at the same time, it's so open. We need to have all these open servers. The protocol is using UDP. Must ring a bell. It's a blessing for whatever spoofing or amplification you're trying to do. Um, and then there's the whole thing about privacy, about everybody seeing to which service you're surfing. And actually, DNS over HTTPS is solving that last point mostly. That's the privacy. So what DNS over HTTPS does, and that's a picture that I'm stolen from Synology. Yeah, I just looked it up like 10 minutes before we went live. Just I needed a picture, and it was actually quite good. So typically, when you have your host and you're not using DNS over HTTPS, so you're just using DNS, what you're going to do is you want to go to a certain website like blog.synology.com. What happens is your PC will send a request out to the first DNS server it finds on its path. So the one that's either configured in your gateway or in your PC. And then that DNS server will say, hey, blog.synology.com, did I see this before or not? If it didn't see it, well, it's going to pass on to the next DNS server, say, hey, do you know where I can find synology.com? And then after a few steps, and we will go in more detail over the whole iteration and how it works in a second. But in the end, DNS server A will get a response from his next in the hierarchy that says, hey, blogsynology.com is available at the IP address 1.23.456.789. Yeah, clearly Synology doesn't know how IPs work. But it's a good thing. They at least they have privacy. So don't try to put the IP in, it won't work. So you get the answer back, and then your PC knows where to go, which IP address. How does DNS over HTTPS work? Well, you're going to do the same. You do blog.synology.com. However, in your browser now supports DoH, and you also configured your browser to use a DoH server, which can be Cloudflare was the first one. It's the 1.1.1.1. if I'm not mistaken. Google is also one that's using DoH. So what your browser does is now create an HTTPS connection to the DoH server and then sending the request over that HTTPS connection. So it's an encrypted connection and your DNS query goes over that. So it actually bypasses all the middle boxes. Well, not bypassing, it will be routed through the middle boxes. But the big difference is that in DNS without HTTPS, you will have all the middle boxes can see where you're going to, meaning that it's not good for privacy, but at the same time, you have real-time block lists, you have DDoS detections, you have all kinds of anti-malware detections that are based on the domain. And then you have all the detections that might find malicious servers and typo squatting from domain names. All these things can be seen on the path towards the server before it resolves. In this case, all those boxes become redundant. They only see an encrypted connection, so it becomes dark data. And that makes for a problem. That means that you have no visibility anymore. If you're on the enterprise site, means that your users are going to surf to certain domains. You don't know where they're going. They might be infected by a malware, and we have a recent one. Which one was it again? Dreambot, was that it, Daniel?
There was Dreambot. Yeah.
Yeah. So Dreambot is using that. So remember, when a bot infects or infects the device, it will reach out to its command and control server. So for that, it does a DNS request or it will use embedded data into DNS. If you have DNS inspection on your firewall, it will catch it, it can block it. However, if it uses DNS over HTTPS, it's dark. You don't see what's happening. Of course, it's more difficult to roll out for them, but as the technology is evolving, servers are becoming available to easily install DNS over HTTPS. I'm sure that Python will shortly have a module that allows DNS over HTTPS server, same for Go or for any other language that is popular in that area. And when they deploy it, there will be no way to see which DNS query or which domain they're going to. The only thing that your middle boxes or your firewalls and gateways can see is an encrypted connection to a specific IP address. So it's actually defeating a lot of the security system. And that has been a problem like forever. You know that when you add more privacy, it's like a trade-off with security in most cases. So for
Right.
privacy, it's good, but for security, it can be a problem.
Well, I was gonna say, I just had to look it up and make sure it's the right one. It's the Godlua botnet that was using DoH to mask its connections to C2 servers. So,
Okay.
like you were saying, it creates a problem when, sometimes we're looking at these kind of connections to see what's going on, and if it's actually going to be encrypted and put through DoH, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for us to observe that kind of traffic.
Yeah, it's gonna make it easier for the attackers to just hide and leverage DNS anyway.
Yeah.
Now, do we say that DNS without DOH is good? Well, that there's still some. Well, I would not say
Well, yeah,
flaws, but
it's a dual-edged sword, right? Like on
yeah,
one side of it, you have a lot of issues with current DNS infrastructure, and the other side, you have a lot more issues with DoH. So there's
yeah,
really no good. It's kind of all bad in my opinion, but
yeah. Well, the DNS has been in the internet forever, and I cannot imagine we just ripping it out and just replacing it with something else. There has been some tries to do it. So remember the DNS over blockchain at some point. But
yeah,
again, it was better for the malicious actors than it was for the people who actually used it because DNS on blockchain, as you might remember, a blockchain node, everybody can add, everybody can read, but only the one
yeah,
who added can change. So that means that if a malicious actor adds his DNS server to that blockchain, well, only he can change it or remove it. So there's no more control, there's no more blacklisting, so it actually becomes worse than the current DNS system.
yeah,
At least with the current one, we have still somebody that regulates it, and there's still some tricks to be done, like what Microsoft did together with GoDaddy when
mhm,
they sinkholed the whole SolarWinds backdoor, and they even were able to respond with an IP address that was like a deactivation code for the backdoor, so it self-destructs. So there's some tricks out there that we can use, but that's just because malicious users found those tricks and they
yeah,
incorporated those tricks in their malware. So now we see them and we can use it against them, but that doesn't mean that DNS is good. And from a DDoS perspective, and our product director for Defense Pro, Sharon, wrote a great blog about that, about DNS security, and it was very timely because we were talking about this DoH at the same time. So, oh yeah, and by the way, I will put all the links in the comments below in a second. So I will put all the links to everything that we're talking about, all the blogs, all the security alerts, and so on. I will put them in the comments below. So be sure to come back afterwards, and then you will have more information, or if you want to read up on some of the stuff that we're talking about. So what has DNS been used for? And we will see some more detail in subsequent slides. But reflection and amplification and DNS spoofing. So that can affect any target. Anybody can become the victim of a DNS amplification attack, whether you have DNS or not. It doesn't matter. It's just amplifying the flood of packets so that's too large for you to consume. And then we have the NX domain attack, which is also known as a pseudo-random subdomain attack. For some people know it as the Dyn attacks or the waterfall torture. Now here you can target multiple servers and mostly DNS servers. So it can target the authoritative DNS server, like in the Dyn attacks. I believe it was Sony.com or PlayStationNetwork.com that was targeted at that time. Um, then you have the recursive servers that can be impacted as collateral because that recursive server is being abused by all the devices to forward requests to the authoritative DNS server. So it can become collateral damage. However, the recursive can also be a target. You can also have bots gathering together behind that same and targeting that one specific recursive server because as you know, our DNS is built on a hierarchical cache. And the first level of the cache is the recursive DNS server that takes the request from the client and then tries to resolve it. And the first thing it does is looking in the cache. But if somebody floods all random DNS names to that recursive server, it will just flush the cache completely. So that's where the negative caching comes, especially when it then goes upstream to get more. But more in a second. And then the NXNS attack, which was actually discovered last year by the Israeli University. We talked about this. We also had an advisory on this, which is a bit more complex. However, this one can target recursive, authoritative, and root servers and has a pretty amazing amplification factor. So reflection and amplification, I think we all know how that works, and mostly it works with UDP. I'm not excluding TCP. We will come back to
Yeah,
TCP
can't
because
really
we,
do that.
yeah, but but typically UDP protocol. So anything that is UDP, DNS, NTP, SSDP, SNMP, CLDAP, Chargen, Memcached, ARMS, WSD, and the more recently, as Daniel remarked in the beginning, remote desktop protocol. Everything that uses UDP can be spoofed, right? You can send a request and you can make that reply go to somebody else. So that's what happens here. You have the attacker, he spoofs the source, the destination will be the open service, not the victim, but the open service. The source IP will be the victim. He sends the UDP request. What does the service do? In case of DNS, oh, the reply is easy. I just swap source and destination. So he swaps source and destination. Source becomes the service, destination becomes the victim. So now he forwards on the response that normally goes to this person who asked the question. The response now goes to the victim. Now, if the question is smaller than the response, then you get amplification. And how much time bigger the response is? So if you ask a question of 10 bytes and the response is 2,800 bytes, then you have an amplification of 280 times. Like in DNS, you can have between 28 and 54 times. NTP more than 500. WSD also depends on how the device is configured. So WSD is what is being used on IoT devices. That's Windows, what is called again? Windows Service Discovery. Yeah. So that's a discovery protocol. If your device shares a lot of information of itself, the amplification will be higher. If it doesn't, it will be smaller. Now, of course, those are things that are WSD are things that are typically used inside of your home network. It should never go outside, but that's how accidents happen, right? Same with Memcached.
Happy accidents.
Yeah, it was never supposed to be published on the internet. However, yeah, somebody published it and wait, I'm gonna check my microphone. I'm just seeing. My volumes are a little bit low.
Oh, you sound fine on this side.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I make all kinds of weird hand gestures if you couldn't hear you. But yeah, I was just checking. Also, the RDP UDP amplification attack is a amplification factor of 80. Around that area, I think it's like 80 or 90.
Okay. So yeah, the Memcached disaster, luckily it was resolved quite quickly, but that was one of those
Yeah.
servers that was never supposed to be on the internet, and that was an amplification, a whooping amplification. Oh, yeah. That is
Yeah.
a strange way of writing 51,000 there. I have a
Mm.
s- small
So do you
typo,
want
but
100,000?
yeah.
Ooh, that's a big attack
Yeah.
there.
Let's say it was 50,000. Now, UDP, so UDP, bad for everything that's amplification and reflection and attacks. However, one would think TCP is better because TCP is connection oriented. So the only way to ask a question is if you first make the connection. So the three-way handshake, SYN, SYNAC, ACK, and then you ask your question, then you get a response. So there's some part of like no, not really authentication, but identification of the other endpoint, which means that there's no way that you can get a response back without be telling who you are or where to find you. But however, the three-way handshake of the TCP can be abused in this case, and we've written a report about that. Was it last year? No, it was in
Yeah,
2019.
it was last year.
Last year? Okay.
It was last year going. It was like 2019, December 2019, January
Yeah.
20,
Yeah.
20. But yeah, it was like you said. There was no reflection possible, but there's amplification. Um, yeah, with the
Yeah. So
retransmission.
well, yeah. So the reflection is happening for sure. So that everybody will know. If you send a SYN and you spoof the source, you put the victim instead of destination, then the SYNAC, the server, will respond to the victim. Now, the big difference with UDP here, you need a open service. You need a DNS server, you need an NTP server, you need an SSDP server. With TCP SYN attacks, everybody's game. Your router at home, any device that's connected an IP camera, as long as it answers to a SYN with a SYNAC, like as long as it answers to a ping, basically almost, well, you get a problem. So
Right.
and we all have ports open that are listening. So TCP SYN to any device will result in a reflection. And actually, we saw that when customers in that TCP reflection attack alert that I put there, the link in the bottom. We saw actually, and in my home, I have honeypots running. I could see SYNs coming into my home, and the source IP of that SYN stream was actually one of our customers. So it was like our customer was attacking me with a SYN flood. It looks like a SYN flood, but actually it's a spoofed SYN flood. That means that this is the customer, the victim that he wants to attack. This is me. He sends, okay, I want to attack customer A, and I send it to Pascal's modem at home. And I see a SYN flood coming in from customer A here. And I say, hey, customer A, why are you attacking me? Come on, what's up, man? And what sometimes happens is that the guy who sits here says, hey, Mr. A is attacking me. Let's blocklist him, sorry. Let's blocklist him. And that's what happened when all those reflection attacks were going on. People were saying, hey, we need to file abuse because this customer is attacking. But when you blocklist it, imagine you're blocklisting Salesforce.com. All of a sudden, all your own users cannot go to Salesforce.com anymore because you put it in your local blocklist. Lots of devices automatically assume that there's a SYN attack, put it automatically in the blocklist, and then refuse outgoing or incoming connections to those IPs. Those IPs can be your services, can be customers like Salesforce.com, SAP, or another one. Now, there's another thing. So finally, when I get the request, I respond with a SYNAC. So this victim gets all the SYNAC. Now, there's some kind of amplification, so you would not expect it, but there's some old papers, and it's also in that alert. There's some amplification. Now, when I send a SYNAC and I'm waiting for the ACK to come back, my operating system TCP IP stack will say, hey, I still need that ACK. Okay, let me do a new request, a new SYNAC. and a new SYN-ACK. So it will time out and retry, and it will do that a couple of times. So for each SYN, you have a couple of times a SYN-ACK that goes out. And then there's other problems. There are some implementation, and they're not following the RFCs, we know, but it's like you can optimize the TCP protocol. So what TCP does, it's a three-way handshake. You have a SYN-ACK, and then the server needs to wait for the ACK. And once the server gets the ACK, then he can start streaming data. Now, some clever implementations, like FTP servers, well, it was found in FTP servers, but there's also other services. They are smart. They don't wait for the ACK to come. They assume that the ACK will come anyway, and they start streaming data. They already send out the message of the day or the login header or the page that you're trying to access. So they don't even wait for the ACK to finish. So it's a SYN ACK, and then stream, even though I did not send the final ACK. And if that happens, then you have a SYN to this server, and he starts stream. So you have amplification to the victim. So even though that TCP is not obvious in amplification, it does do amplification. Um, UDP, of course, is the number one. That brings me to carpet bombing, because that was the technique that was used during the reflection attacks that we saw. And the idea there is not to leverage so on one way, the reflection happens by using any IP on the planet to reflect your packet to the victim, but also instead of focusing your attack on one victim IP, so instead of dropping one large nuke on victim IP, which easily shows up in your detection as a big spike of packets coming into one specific IP, they're gonna attack the whole subnet of the victim. So they're going to spread as much as possible. So instead of one big bomb, it's a lot of small bombs, and it spreads out over the whole. And this is now a class C, so this is /24. So you see 255. So instead of 600 packets, you have like a little bit spread. But here you don't see the spike anymore. You see that here it's easy to detect. Here it's much more difficult to detect. That looks almost like noise. And with all the noise that's going around on the internet, it's difficult to make the difference between, is it now a gray, so somebody who is scanning me, a security researcher that's scanning, or is it somebody that's attacking me? So they're actually just hiding in all that gray noise, and it's much more difficult to detect when such an attack is going on. So you have the source IPs that are completely random and distributed, can be any IP on the planet, and the destination IP can be any IP in the /24. So it becomes really difficult to bring the two pieces together to actually find out they are under a DDoS attack. Daniel, anything to add until here?
Not at the moment on that.
Yeah, that's more
Yeah, it's
my.
pretty clear. Oh, I mean, yeah, as far as the carpet bombing goes, I mean, I think it's a really great technique that's being used by some of the criminal actors out there. It's one way to get straight into disruption.
Yeah, I am talking a lot, but your time is coming, Daniel. Be sure.
I know it's okay, no worries.
Yeah, those are things that I mostly worked on. So also so hostname resolution, just a refresher, and all that is also written up in a report, the NXNSAttack alert that we did. So how does hostname resolution work? So when a client wants to get access to a specific server, so when you type in your browser www.microsoft.com, you will send it to your first DNS server that's either configured in your PC or in your gateway. So your PC will go to your gateway will go to the recursive resolver of your ISP, and then the recursive resolver will look at www.microsoft.com. Okay, do I have it in my cache already? Maybe somebody, not you, but maybe your neighbor asked for Microsoft.com like a couple of seconds ago, so he already knows the IP address. If he finds it in the cache, he will immediately respond so that he doesn't have to put the load on the backend on the authoritative DNS servers. That's how the hierarchical caching of DNS is working. And that's how the whole system has been sized, and how if you take away the cache, everything falls apart because they're not built to address that many requests. We saw that happen with Dyn. Even though they were anycasted across the planet, they still went down by that flood of pseudo-random DNS attack or subdomain attack. So www.microsoft.com, I don't know what to do with it. So if the recursive server doesn't know, first he will go to the root server. He will ask, hey, you are the root server for the .com domain. Tell me, where can I find Microsoft? And he will say, well, for Microsoft, you need to go to this servers. And he will give top-level domain servers, a list of top-level domain servers. So your recursive resolver will take one of those top-level domain servers and we'll do a request to that top-level domain server. And the top-level domain server will say, oh, Microsoft.com. Yeah, sure, I know where Microsoft is. You need to go over there. So he gets the referral back, and then he goes to the actual, what we call the authoritative DNS server for Microsoft.com. Now you see that it's Microsoft.com and it's .NET. So that's already, actually it starts with Microsoft.com, go to the .com, it comes back, goes to the top level domain server who says, oh, yeah, but that's not a .com, it's a .NET. So you need to go to the .NET root server. And then the .NET root server says, ah, I know where Microsoft.com can be resolved. It's at msft.net. So it had some more complexity, but you see the whole recursive process, right? So you have that .com requests. You need then to go to the Microsoft part. Once you know the Microsoft part, you find the domain server for that Microsoft part, and he will tell you where is www.microsoft.com. So you get the IP address, and finally you can send it back. Now, all looks fine and great here, and that's how, in theory, the resolution works. But I left out one small thing, and for those who listened well, I said that when I ask for Microsoft.com at the top level domain server, it will send me back a list of all the authoritative DNS servers that can respond. So there's more than one typically for availability. So he will send back a list and then he chooses one of them. No, he's not choosing actually. What happens is he tries all of them. And that's where the whole problem with DNS lies when it comes to the recursive resolution. So this is in reality what happens. So you have your client, Microsoft.com. I don't have it in my cache. I go to the root server. It's a .com. Okay, but let's start with the .NET. So .NET says, oh, you have to go to the top level domain server for .com, and he will tell you it's at .NET. So he sends back a referral. And that referral contains all the servers for Microsoft.com authoritative DNS server. So you see here now I have like four of them. So what the DNS server now will do, he will try all four of them. He will not stop after one. He will not choose one. He will try all four of them. He will wait for their response. He will record how long it took, and he will keep the fastest one. But the thing is, he tries all of them, not one, all of them for every request. So every request that comes in that he cannot resolve the cache, he's trying all of them. Can you see all the traffic that is happening? How many packets? That's more requests, more responses, more requests, more responses. So instead of one going back and forth, it's like one, and then you get back four going to these servers, and then each server gives you four or five. So there's five more going there. So it's a lot of traffic that is generating. And that's where the NXNSAttack actually is based on. So you probably do remember the Dyne attack. So how is that implemented to perform such an attack? That's where the botnets come in because typically you want to use an army of devices that can do random subdomain names. So if you want to attack, for example, pizza.com in this case, you would prepend a random host name to pizza.com. And then you will send that to your DNS server. Your DNS server, because it's random, he doesn't know, he doesn't have it in his cache. So he needs to go ask the authoritative DNS server. So he will do his whole resolution process to find out who's the authoritative name server and then ask him. And then he gets the response back. Now, the next request from another device that's on the same segment can again ask for a random. So he will have to again go up and ask it. So, and if everybody just sends a flood of random requests, that means that there's no caching anymore on the recursive server and it will all be in the authoritative DNS servers. Now with the NXNS attack, so that whole chatty thing that happens in the backend that I was explaining, that one request becomes five and he's waiting for all of them. Here are the amplification factors, and you can see we're talking packet amplification, which is PAF here. 1,600 times if you go to the recursive resolver. Bandwidth amplification less 160, but it's the request amplification. So this puts a lot of load on the recursive resolver. You can put a lot of load on the second level domain server, and but also so the authoritative name server, so victim.com. So this would be the ISP server. This would be the authoritative server that hosts your domain. This is the root and top level domain server. So you can even put more stress on those top level domain servers. So those can actually be used in attacks that take out the root of the internet. And all you need is this same infrastructure where you just generate random DNS or hostname queries that go to the servers and that get resolved.
Now, to kind of jump in at the end of that,
Yeah.
as far as DoH goes, I see a little bit of an issue with the small amount of DoH servers that are out there. You know, it's kind of the same issue that we had with Dyn, where people are not using redundant systems and there's not a distributed network. When you start putting all your eggs in one honey basket or one egg basket, you could have potential issues there in the future if we continue to use DoH and rely on a small amount of servers for that. It could easily be a bottleneck for attackers. The other thing I want to bring up is, you know, the rush to privacy. This whole privacy versus control thing. At the moment, even outside of all this, we have people running to different encrypted apps and everything. Well, this is all great. Privacy is going to take away certain parts of security, you know, and that's kind of the issue, the duality that we deal with is that at one point, um, you know, we're going to have to give up some privacy in order to have security, or we're going to have to give up security to have full privacy. But I don't see a situation where we can have our cake and eat it too. Uh, that's just my little
Yeah, we
opinion on that subject.
yeah, we had that discussion before. It's a little bit the same for all the intelligence services. You know,
Yeah,
yeah, it's all good to have encrypted chat, but that while your chat is being encrypted and probably not that important for the world or for survival of some people. However, the encrypted chat messages that are exchanged by terrorists can also not be intercepted or looked at. So it's yeah, it's always like two parts of the. However, the CIA, sorry, it was the CIA, right? That had that backdoor in the encryption in Switzerland.
two backdoors.
Yeah, no, two companies.
Yeah, two
Both of
companies backdoors,
yeah,
and apparently they have a third or something like that on the way too.
yeah,
So
yeah,
we'll
yeah.
see where that goes.
That's a topic for another.
Yeah, well, we'll save that one for later for sure.
Uh,
Yeah, so a little bit about Bitcoin, the blog I recently wrote. Nothing really groundbreaking. It was just an interesting point of view. Back in 2015, 2016, we were dealing with the Armada Collective, which we'll call the real Armada Collective. They were the group that we were seeing doing sample attacks, asking for an extortion amount, and then following through if you didn't pay them. At that point in time, I think they were asking for like $5,000 or $6,000, which is like 20 Bitcoin. Today, if they would have kept that Bitcoin, it'd be worth $760,000, and the windfall from that is just absolutely insane. So when I start looking at some of these things and the projections that um, massive banking institutions put out there saying that Bitcoin can go up to $146,000 a coin, I see a giant problem there. Inside the security community, I know of way too many companies and issues where finances is an issue. They can't afford this, they can't do that. But then when you start looking at the criminal syndicates out there that have been hoarding Bitcoin for the last few years, the question becomes how much are they actually worth? And are they worth more than security companies? Are they more well funded than some of the top security companies and their SOCs? And it becomes a very very scary reality as the price goes up. Now, the good thing is since I wrote the blog, Bitcoin's crashed like $10,000 in value. So a lot of that fear goes out the window. I will admit that as the price goes down. But we saw all this crash I think in 2018 after a massive peak, and I think it was 2018. So I believe we're kind of in that same period where we're seeing a crash, and it's possible that Bitcoin will continue to rise in value, especially there only being an X amount of coins possible once those coins are all accounted for, then once again the price will go up. It's just kind of like the same things we're seeing what they're doing with GameStop today and AMC as far as the stock market goes. It's these kind of controlled runs, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of money and transfer that's happening. And when these criminals have more money than us, I think it's going to become a very big issue. And I think it's a very, very large possibility that in the next coming years, as Bitcoin continues to go up in value, that could be a real reality that we have to face.
Yeah, I can see prices. Well, not see. I don't actually see it, but I can imagine prices dropping on the underground for certain malware because it's four times the value. So if it was four times the value, well, maybe they want to take away a little bit, but they can slash their price with 50% and
Yeah.
still gain 100% more. So they get double the price, and the price is actually 50% of the bitcoins it was before. And that's just by the dynamics of the market of the value of the Bitcoin. So all of the sudden, people who bought Bitcoins before, who were sitting on Bitcoins from malicious activities, they can reinvest them and they can accelerate and they can actually their buying power is doubled or quadrupled in that case. So
For an example, everybody's heavy on talking about the crypto money in Iran. And I think that's a really big issue as far as people abusing power and causing power outages. Um, but out there with the crypto mining in general, crypto jacking, these people are making a lot of money. A
mhm,
long time ago, there's a couple of reports, just a few years ago, actually, it wasn't really that long ago. But a few reports came out saying that crypto jacking wasn't worth it. They're only making a few $100s a day in Bitcoin. Well, a year ago, Bitcoin was worth 10,000, it's worth 30,000 today. So while that might have been true 2 or 3 years ago, that crypto jacking wasn't worth it, there's once again a windfall for them that their coins from back then are worth so much more, and they're mining now. Their value, their potential value, their yield in the future is exponential at this moment. I mean, yeah. So what? They make $300 today, and that might not be a lot for them, but what is it going to be worth in a year? What is it going to be worth when it's worth $146,000 a coin?
yeah,
So I think it's a giant issue, and like you said, I think there's a lot of criminals that realize the change in value. And to our next subject about, last year Bitcoin was worth $10,000, and today it's worth 30,000, and
yeah,
that RDOS groups had to account for that. Like you can't ask for $20 or 20 Bitcoin today. Asking
yeah.
for 20 Bitcoin is insane. So of course you've got to change that. And there's a little bit of greed too to the whole side. Is they're not really asking for like $5,000 or $6,000 anymore. They're asking for 10, 20, $30,000, which is absolutely insane. I mean, they're starting to get to a point where they're asking for more money than what mitigation costs, which that's always been a little gripe of mine. It's like how could these people actually demand $250,000 for a DDoS attack? It makes no sense to me. So that's why I kind of look at the RDOS with like a grain of salt, I guess, or whatever you want to call it. It's just it's weird that they ask for so much. It really is, especially what we went through in 2014, 15, 16, where they kind of had a good money mark and people were willing to pay it. So,
Yeah, I actually looking at the slide and I zoomed it in for the audience so they can see it well. So
oh yeah,
this
the ransom letters.
yeah, this is the slide on the 2020 DDoS extortion or the ransom DDoS campaign. When it started back in mid of August last year. And you see the amount. So a 10
20
Bitcoin,
Bitcoin.
yeah,
Oh yeah, that one too.
20 Bitcoin was worth about 260,000 US dollar. While now the same 20
Today,
Bitcoin,
today, 10 Bitcoin's worth 319. 319. I just had to look it up.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
since we're looking at these numbers, and
yeah, but
20
that's
Bitcoin today is worth 640,000.
yeah.
Just put that out there.
Now the thing is, during those extortion campaigns, the actors became aware of that because in the new wave that we're seeing, So this is the update. That is based on activity that we saw the last week of December and the first week of January, and that's actually at the moment that Bitcoin was ramping up quite highly. It was not at the top moment yet. Now it had that top and it's just going down again, but it was really ramping up early end of December, early January, and that's when we saw all this new activity. And what they did is so typically they send out a letter, hey, we are this group, and I go back one slide. So we are Fancy Bear or Lazarus Group, and we are about to attack you unless you pay a certain amount on this Bitcoin address. So, and if you don't pay, they will come back at you with an attack 200, 300 gigabit per second. In some cases, they did not attack you. However, to keep their campaign alive, they need to follow through at least a couple of times with an attack. Otherwise, their campaign will never be taken serious by people. Now, that said, so they came with that letter, but now we see what they're doing is the people that they attacked in August, September, October are now getting recontacted and they receive a new message. And the message goes now as maybe you forgot about us, but we didn't forget you. We were busy working on more profitable projects, but now we're back. So the people who were attacked, and we know that they did not pay because none of our customers actually paid out. So they come back. How do we know that those are the same actors again? Well, it's because they know that they attacked this company before, and that was never in the public. We never reveal our customer names when they were attacked. It was not in the media. The customer itself did not mediatize it. So there's nobody that knows that this customer was attacked besides us and the actors. And then secondly, they're referring to the old Bitcoin address. So in the first letter, they give a Bitcoin address, and that Bitcoin address is specific for that one customer, meaning that that's how they track the payment. If a customer pays and he pays on that address, then the actor knows, okay, this guy paid, we will not attack him. Well, that's what we hope they do, at least. But so that's how they can track them. So who knows the previous address of that customer? Only the actor can know that. So in that letter, we see actually that they know that this customer was a target before and received messages and did not pay. And they mentioned the two Bitcoin addresses. You can choose either pay here or pay there. And it's listed in the message. So it's pretty confident that this is the same actor, unless it's somebody who worked with the same group or stolen the information from the group. There's also a possibility.
Yeah, it's a very
Yeah.
low possibility.
Now, the other thing that we saw with that second wave, that circling back tactic, is that they didn't wait a couple of days to start a large attack. Most of our customers received that message, and only a couple of hours later, we saw a massive attack going on. And the attack didn't go on forever, so sometimes, and we saw that last year, DDoS extortion attacks can go on for days or weeks if you don't pay and if you cannot mitigate it. However, here they start the attack. Maximum that we saw was 9.5 hours after such a specific letter. We saw less, we
Which
saw
is
more.
really that's really odd. I mean,
It
it's something that I've had to wrap my brain around. Is that like I said, in 2015, these groups that they claim to be would ask for $5,000 and launch a sample attack that lasted a few minutes. Now they're asking
Mhm.
for $145,000 more than what they used to, and attacking for 9 hours longer than they used to for a sample attack. It's insane to me.
No,
There's
it's
a
yeah.
huge change in TTPs
I
there.
I think that this is not a sample attack. What I think is they want to accelerate their campaign and they want to take the maximum out of their research they already did. So they attacked many different victims between August and December. They did all the research on those victims. They know the IP addresses to attack. They know the annex services like the DNS hosting provider. So they already did that. They wrote them already a message. Now what they do is they take all that research and they accelerate their campaign. Why? Because
Mhm.
Bitcoin is ramping up. So yeah, they even tell you, hey, because Bitcoin is ramping up, we will halve our demand. But halving the demand is still a two times increase for them in real value. So they did halve it, but it's two times increase. So what they do is now scale it up and accelerate it. So because they already did the attack, they know that probably that guy will be protected or that victim will be protected. So they try for 9 hours. If it doesn't work, okay, up, let's go to the next victim. So just accelerating the pace and trying to extort as much as possible people at the same time while the Bitcoin is going up. That's that's how I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it the same way. The tactics and techniques and procedures that these people are using are definitely changing. And I don't know if it's working for them. I talking to some of these actors in the underground, and a lot of times they're complaining about how people aren't paying them. It's like, well, of course, you're asking for way too much money compared to what these old groups used to. But like you said, Bitcoin's rising and it's becoming a new tactic to bring people back to the table. And with that, there's also RDoS, or not RDoS, I'm sorry, ransomware groups. Was it Suncrypt, Ragnar Locker, and the new Avedon
Hmm.
group are using DDoS attacks to actually
Yeah,
bring their victims back to the table to negotiate their extortion price.
exactly. Yeah.
So that's why I don't think it's so necessarily insane, but I have a hard time, as I said, wrapping my brain around the increase across the board with DDoS attacks and extortion, both in RDoS and ransomware. It's To me, it's very interesting to see an attack of this size and magnitude and length coming from an RDoS group. And it's also very interesting to see ransomware groups using DDoS now to bring their victims back to the table. You know, as I was saying earlier, with the rise in cryptocurrency, the rise in Bitcoin, we too see the rise in attacks.
Yeah, we've seen it accelerating from mid-August to end of December, and this campaign has been active all the time. So yeah, so some of the media is talking about the second wave or the third wave, but much like the coronavirus, I would say it's almost in sync. Um,
Yeah, I don't think they've gone away. That was one of the things that we've
but
been
yeah,
talking about.
yeah, I don't believe they went away. They were always active, and we see that also in the number of attacks, which is going up. And
But if in the years past, they did have breaks. They had like little
mhm,
lulls in their attack where they would
yeah,
disappear for a few months and then come back.
yeah.
Um, very, very vertical specific at that time too.
Yeah, and their attack vectors actually did not change. I looked into the attacks, and the attack vectors are still the same as the attacks that started in mid of August when they did follow through attack. It's still the same vectors. I did not look in detail yet. I need to compare the source IP addresses between both attacks to see if they made a shift in their infrastructure. But
Yeah.
as far as I can see, the vectors are still the same. So probably the same scripts, maybe a few more servers, a few less servers, moving a couple of servers to not get to keep hiding. But they have been quite busy and they have some resources.
Yeah.
That's a 200 gig sustained attack.
And like you said, they have
Yeah,
resources. That's another
yeah,
issue with the rise of Bitcoin is they can afford more resources now with the price going up.
yeah,
If you had one Bitcoin, you could afford $10,000 in infrastructure last year. Today, you can afford 30,000, and that's notable.
yeah. All right, now yeah, we go to the CISA now. The CISA, it's January 13th, so it's actually one day before the DoH report from the
Oh, they've been
NSA.
busy this year. They've been real busy.
Yeah, we saw a lot of reports coming from them, but this one specifically because I had somebody asking me a question about that, and it was actually kind of confusing. So the report is great. Don't misunderstand me. It's really good that they have that report because cloud attacks are accelerating, and there's so many mistakes and misconfigurations that can happen in a cloud that it's really hard to stay up to date and to keep it from happening. Now, they had a part where they talk about authentication and where they say, and I just read it off here to quote them that I don't make a mistake, but CISA verified that the threat actor successfully signed into one user's account with proper multi-factor authentication. In this case, CISA believes that the threat actors may have used browser cookies to defeat MFA with the pass the cookie attack. So what happened here is that even though MFA was used, another a weaker chain in the whole a weaker link in the whole security chain was broken, which is the pass the cookie attack. Actually, the MFA was not broken. The multi-factor authentication was not broken. It was defeated by the fact that something was weaker up the chain of the application.
Yeah.
So I had people ask me, is MFA still fit for purpose? Why use MFA if those attacks just walls all around it? And as I wrote a blog on it, and I explain where those cookies come from, why session cookies are necessary, and also some of the mitigations. And it's about the weakest link in the chain. If your implementation of your token that you pass back and forward between client and server is so weak that it can easily be attacked and the cookie extracted and abused by an attacker, why would he go and try to figure out and hack your multi-factor authentication? It's the same with authentication. If you put in a username password admin 123456, it doesn't care if you use SSH or if you use multiple levels of strong encryption and 4,000 or 16,000 bit encryption. Who cares? If your password is weak, that's your weakest link. That's where they're gonna get you. So the same here, the MFA is not failing. The multi-factor authentication did not fail. However, the weakest link was somewhere else and it was easy to bypass. So it became useless. It doesn't matter anymore if you use single authentication or multi-factor or biometric or whatever you can add in. If you can hack the thing that comes after, it's just, yeah, it's not
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say my buddy Flanville had done some research a few years back about this, and it's kind of interesting. You know, if you can compromise the host, the client's victim machine,
mhm.
you can easily manipulate the cookies to bypass
Oh,
these things. And the problem is reporting these things sometimes. You know,
yeah.
you'll kind of get the response back of like, oh well, you know, you had to compromise that box first before this issue is there, so it's not our problem to look into. It's like, oh, now
Well,
it's very,
mhm.
very well an issue to look into.
Yeah. Yeah, so the thing about those session keys, I remember I am a fossil in IT. So like in the 90s, I was writing PHP code and I had to implement my own session ID. So what you do is you log in and then you create a session ID on the server side, you store it in your database, you send it to the client, and for every response, the client will send that session ID or that token, as we call it, the session token, send it back to the server. So you can bring back the context where the user is working in. So the thing about HTTP clients and servers is that they are, even though they use a connection-oriented protocol between two connections, between two requests, they are stateless. When the client logs in, and then after he comes for the second question after logging in, the server has no clue this client was even there. Yeah, of course, there's log files, but the idea, the server has no idea who you are. So how did we solve that in the past? That is by doing, you do the login. When you authenticate the user, you create a unique token, like an API token, but that is now a session ID or a session token. And you pass that session token to the client. Now there's multiple ways. You can use cookies, which is convenient because a browser is programmed that way to automatically send the cookie whenever you go to a specific domain. So you don't have to do anything special to post that to post that key again. You can also put it in a hidden variable in the form. So whenever the user clicks post, automatically that variable with the token ID will be sent to the server. Or you can put it in the URL itself, the query parameter. But that's not so smart because people can read what's in the browser bar and they can see like session ID equals and they just copy paste that key and they can just fake it, you know. Now, cookies have the good thing they are persistent across sessions. So even though your user reboots his PC, well, it still works because the cookie still has the key. As long as you need to have a timeout on your database, of course, but in theory, you can have a session ID like forever. So that session ID is always passed through, and that session ID actually identifies and authenticates that user and sticks to his session. So whoever can make a request to the server with that session ID, so if it's not this client but another client here, an attacker, he can send a request and uses that session ID. He has access to everything that user has access. He doesn't need to log in. All he needs is that session ID, that token. So how can they take that token? Well, you can do man in the middle. You put reverse proxy in between. You take the session of the user. Becomes more difficult with certificates because yeah, the user will see something is wrong, that the certificate does not fit the domain name. So man in the middle, it's a possibility, but it becomes more difficult. A backdoor, so can be infected by phishing, backdoor installed like Emotet, for example, or another one, instead of stealing,
Not
use
anymore.
not
Yeah, I just had to throw that out there.
yeah,
Emotet's having a little bit of an issue
exactly.
today.
That that is why I was thinking about Emotet. And another one, which is for me like the most important one, is browser extensions. We have seen so many malicious browser extensions. What can they steal? Well, username, password, but other things like session cookies, because they have full access to the web page in the user's context. So they can easily take it out. Now, the thing is, how do you mitigate that? Because session IDs, we have been using the same basic idea for session IDs since the 90s. It never evolved. Like from the first time that I did PHP until now, even if you write a program now, whatever technology you're probably using a framework, and underneath that framework is all the authentication stuff. It will be hidden from you. You will not know about the session ID, but there is a session ID in there. So it's still using the same basic principle. So it's still vulnerable for the same attacks. And that's what the CISA is saying, that, hey, guys, they just circumvented it, bypassed the cookie. So how can you mitigate it? Well, you need to be able to identify who's asking you your question. So not only the session, but what I say is to add more context. So you have the session ID, but you add the IP address of the HTTP client, for example. That's what we did 20 years ago. Now we know that IP addresses can be natted, can be somebody can be having a backdoor, or so it's not 100% to identify the client. So multiple people are netted behind the same IP address and so on. So session ID, IP address, it will help, but it's not the solve all solution. My favorite solution when it comes to security is client certificates, because uh, then without stealing the client certificate, and typically client certificates can be stored in a secure area in the desktop, which even makes it for backdoors non-trivial to access the key and extract the key and copy that key to another system. So if you have a client certificate, that will uniquely identify your client. And you can make a session ID, but the server will enforce the authentication for every SSL connection that is being made. So for every request, it will make sure that the client is who he says he is. So that's for me the best solution. However, deployment can be disaster. If you're working with a limited number of partners, if it's for your employees or for business to business where you work with partners, you can have a PKI infrastructure, and you can have them request certificates and distribute certificates and so on. Yeah, that works fine. Still, it's hard to scale it, and comes with a lot of deployment headaches, but it's possible. However, if you're working with e-commerce, that's impossible. You cannot give every user who comes to register to your website his own certificate. It will be costly, and it will be a nightmare to you will not even be able to administer that or to manage that. So the other way is use dynamic tokens. A little bit like IPsec VPN does. What does IPsec VPN does? You have that rekeying tool. So you also have a shared key between the two endpoints in IPsec VPN, but you can rekey it every like couple of seconds. So the encryption key or the shared key will change every couple of seconds between two clients. So it makes it more difficult to attack it. Even if the key is stolen, the window of opportunity is much more smaller. You can do the same with session tokens. You can change them every X seconds, or you can change it on every request. Now, the problem becomes if an attacker steals the key and you do it on every request, then the attacker has the right session key and your user is blocked out, but the attacker has full access. So you need to be careful with changing tokens. It's more time based than it is on per access. And the other way, add more context, not by IP address, but use client-side fingerprinting. So there are client-side fingerprinting libraries out there that allow fingerprinting of the web browser. So which fonts are installed, which extensions, browser extensions, what operating system, and all that makes a unique fingerprint typically for a device. Now it will be very hard for an attacker to mimic that whole fingerprint on his side with that session ID. That will be nearly impossible. So that might be one way You have the session ID plus the client-side fingerprint, and then you can identify and bring them together, and then you are more sure that the right person is accessing. And if you see the client-side fingerprint changing with the same session ID, then you might raise an alert because that might be a user that got hacked. So that client-side fingerprinting, I think that there's something there. However, now comes the whole thing with privacy again. Same as with DoH. Some people don't want client-side fingerprinting because it impacts their privacy. Same with cookies, tracking cookies. Yeah, that's what made advertising great, but the drawback is they can track you everywhere. Whenever you buy something, it's following you on every website that you go to. That's because of the cookie. Yeah, that was invented actually to make persistent sessions, to make dynamic applications. Now, client-side fingerprinting, again, people don't like that, and browsers are now making special routines to fake the fingerprinting, to block fingerprinting, to do everything so that fingerprinting is not possible anymore. So yeah, you gain some privacy on one end, but we get a security problem on the other end.
It's a double-edged sword, man.
Yeah. It's like the topic of our talk here. We're coming back to the same problem over and over again.
It's going to become a big issue, I think, in general, going forward. But
Yeah.
we will talk about that on a future
Yeah, talking
future
about
talk.
big issues.
Yeah.
The solar wind. Oh man. Yeah, there's no way going around that one. We have to mention it, and yeah, we have to talk about it.
Oh yeah.
It's
I mean, this one could actually be a whole entire podcast itself. Or
yeah, absolutely. Well, when we saw it starting, it was like FireEye was hacked and the red team tool stolen. That was the first alert that we brought out in early December.
yeah, now it's FireEye, CrowdStrike, and
Yeah, but
a
then
handful of others. It's
yeah,
kind of crazy.
but FireEye, it seemed, was hacked by a through not by but through SolarWinds, and then from there, SolarWinds was actually a supply chain attack. Now, I think it's important just to have your context on the whole attack, because we saw that attack research, all the drama and all the media and all the research that are working on it. We saw it like unfold one malware by malware. So first there was Sunspot, then there was Sunburst, and then came Raindrop, and then came Teardrop, and we always get a little bit deeper and deeper and deeper inside of the story and what happened. So what I want to
And
do,
just to fully disclose, the story is not over yet. There's
oh yeah,
still
yeah, yeah, there's still deeper.
DFIR
Yeah,
going on everywhere. No one knows how this happened, who was
yeah,
behind it.
yeah.
Speculation everywhere.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and now you also see like some companies are coming back. Hey, we were attacked by the same attackers as SolarWind, but not through SolarWind because they never owned SolarWind. But the tactics are looking very similar. But this is the context or what I keep in my head when I think about winds or when I talk about solar winds. This is how the attack moved and how the different malwares map onto the different things that are happening. So there's two important ones, the sunspot and sunburst for the initial attack. So what the attacker did was he gained access to SolarWinds. How he gained access, not clear to me yet. Might be email, compromised email module, like happened to another security vendor that recently
To be
reported
fair,
it.
no one knows.
Um,
At this
Clouds,
point,
yeah,
it's up
yeah,
in the air.
can be cloud, can be phishing, can be USB stick, can be somebody who was paid off. Anyway, they were able to put a malware called Sunspot in the environment of SolarWinds. Through that backdoor, to that Sunspot backdoor, they were able to find where SolarWinds build servers are. The build servers are those part of the DevOps process. You know, SolarWinds is a security package that does monitoring of network traffic and monitoring of network devices. So that's the software that's actually been used to implant the backdoor and distribute it to all their customers. So how did they get into that software? So that was Sunspot gave them the first access. And then they built a second malware that they installed on the development servers of SolarWinds. So SolarWinds, whenever they make a change in their code, they did an update for patch, they need to rebuild the whole package, the whole SolarWinds program. That happens on servers overnight typically, or interactive or can be scheduled. So that's like compiling in the background and then spits out an executable, and maybe that executable or that install package will then be uploaded automatically to the download server where customers can download the patch and install the patch. Now, what they were able to do is with the Sunspot backdoor, they got access to that development server and they installed a second malware, which was Sunburst. And the thing that Sunburst did, so that's the red little guy here that sits on the development servers, he's looking for build processes. Command line build. Whenever he sees build starting, what this one did was take a source file that is identical to the source file of SolarWinds, but with added source code for a backdoor. Sorry, that's actually the sunburst. I'm wrong here with my sunspot. So the sunspot is the one looking for the build process and then puts in the sunburst malware. Yeah, even I get confused sometimes. So so he looks for the build process. When the build process starts, he changes the file, a source file. So instead of the original source file, it becomes now the source file from the malicious attacker that gets compiled in that same build process. So now it's compiled into the package, and then part of that build process is signing the executable, signing the installer package. So once that gets signed, then it gets uploaded and customers can download it. Customers download it. It's signed by SolarWinds with their official certificate. So it's a trusted package. Microsoft trusts it, the customer trusts it. You can install it, it's installed. But it's installed with the Sunburst backdoor included in the binary. So now everybody who downloaded, and that was between March and August, I believe, in that time frame, who downloaded updates and patches from SolarWinds, got that version with the backdoor inside, got it installed. Now the backdoor was clever. It waited for a cooldown period of 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks, it reached out to its command and control infrastructure to ask what to do. And for some of them, the actors were actually selective, as I understand, to whom they were going to the next step. So a lot of customers, was like 11,000, I believe, that were impacted
I think
by
it's
the
like
backdoor,
18.
or 18.
Oh, impacted by yeah, yeah, yeah.
So by the Sunburst backdoor, it was like thousands of customers impacted, but not all of them were compromised. However, they were impacted. That means that, well, they all have to go and check in their logs. They need to do forensics research to find out, did somebody do something more? And that something more in several customers, and there's more and more coming now. So that's how the story is unfolding now because we see more people coming forward. Hey, this happened to me. And there's two more malwares that came out. One was Teardrop and the other is Raindrop. I believe one was Symantec and the other one, I don't remember who reported it recently, the Raindrop one. So, and that malware was downloaded by the Sunburst backdoor. So it was probably instructed by the command and control server for this customer, download Teardrop. And then the job of Teardrop is to download and install Cobalt Strike. And Cobalt Strike, yeah, that's a pen testing tool. That's a tool that professionals can use to do pen testing. It allows you, I think I have, no, I don't have a slide. It allows you to move laterally inside an organization, elevate permissions, privileges so that you can get access to more and you can take more data and then you can extract data. And it's actually while they were extracting data that FireEye caught them. So FireEye caught them. FireEye caught the backdoor in the SolarWinds software, which is the Sunburst, which then made SolarWinds look, how did they get in here? And then they found out, oh, it's through our development service. And there is actually another malware called Sunspot that is replacing that source file that contains the backdoor. That backdoor was apparently like 4,000 lines of code, which is not infinitely small. So you might think, why did SolarWinds not see that? But probably they have millions of lines of code. That their whole software exists from because so many plugins. It's been on the market for so long, so it's probably a couple of millions of lines of code. And also, each time they look at the source code, they don't see the backdoor. So when a developer was working even on the same file where the backdoor was, he sees the original file, but it's only when the build process starts that that file gets replaced by the malicious one. And then it gets built into the binary, signed, and distributed. And then probably they change it back to the original one. So the developer doesn't see the backdoor. So even if you do a code audit of all the source code, you would not even see the backdoor because it's not there at that moment. It's only there for the small amount of time that the build is running and that generates the whole code. So that's in a nutshell what the SolarWinds is and what we know about SolarWinds. So for malwares up to now, a couple of customers that have been breached and have seen malicious activity. Many customers of SolarWinds have this had this backdoor. Now the backdoor, yeah. One more thing about the Sunburst backdoor. For those customers who were infected by the backdoor, Microsoft and GoDaddy use DNS. Our DNS is back. Use DNS because one of the things that the backdoor did was go out to DNS and resolve a specific host name. That host name changes over time using DGA, domain name generation algorithm. So they just change it a lot over time. It's typical for backdoors to not be detected, but they were able to crack that DGA, and Microsoft and GoDaddy set up DNS servers that resolved the name that the malware was asking for their command and control to a certain IP range. Now, the funny thing, well, not the funny thing, na- whoever is implanting that sunburst must have been a sophisticated actor. And one thing we know about sophisticated actors, they do not want to be caught. So they want to be able to clean up their tracks as fast and as easy as possible. So that whenever there's something goes wrong, let's just delete and clean up everything. So there was a failsafe, not a failsafe, but a self-destruct trigger. And that trigger was based on the DNS. So if the sunburst went out to the DNS server and got a response for a certain with a certain private range IP address, I don't remember the exact IP, but it was a private range IP address. That was like the key to self-destruct. And that's what researchers found out by reversing the malware. That's the key to self-destruct. So Microsoft and GoDaddy set up DNS infrastructure so that they took over the domain names of the DGA, and now whenever Sunburst went out, it got that private IP address that meant self-destruct, and it was removing itself. So there will be no more backdoor in those customers that were affected. However, if you were affected in the past can mean that they have a foothold today. If they installed Teardrop or another malware and they installed Cobalt Strike, they might have removed everything by now, but they still can have an admin account that they created somewhere hidden, or they can have another backdoor that sits on the server, or they created a VPN account to get access. So you still need to go through the whole audit. Make sure that all usernames, passwords are changed. Make sure that you check all the access rights and whoever has access to your systems. Make sure that you check all your servers for strange behavior. So behavioral analysis, forensics, there's lots of work to do for people that were SolarWinds customers to actually make sure that they were not affected or actually breached afterwards. So you can never be 100% sure. That is the big problem. It's a sophisticated actor. We know that much. So they know how to hide and how to cover their tracks. So it will not be easy to find them. It will not just go to your firewall logs. And even that, the command and control communication was using a customer improvement protocol of SolarWinds. So actually, it looked like legitimate SolarWinds traffic when it went out. So the firewall would not even be able to say, "Hey, there is a malware here." So it was very hard to detect. It was well built. We are sparing you the drama of the attribution. It's attributed to UNC with some number.
UNC Dark Halo.
Which actually, and yeah, so as you know in the press, so yeah, we will not completely spare you of trauma, actually, because I need to make the bridge to Daniel's next topic, which,
The last and final topic of the day.
so none of the researchers, the serious researchers that I saw have attributed it to a country. They all attributed it to a common name, UNC something or another code name that is, there's a common actor there, but not yet a country. However, yet the United States attributed it to Russia, of course.
To be
And
fair, they don't even know how many threat actor groups are inside of SolarWinds because there was another supernova malware that wasn't mentioned that was
mhm,
not part of the original breach, but was likely part of another group that was inside of the network.
yeah,
Um, which leads us to this topic, as you said. This one's kind of an interesting one. In general, you really don't see too many warnings and things like that coming out of Russia, but now we see a warning coming out of Russia that as the Biden administration comes in, for Russian organizations and businesses to be prepared for possible U.S. strikes, the cybersecurity strikes, not physical kinetic strikes. Um, but this one is going to be very interesting. The way how SolarWinds goes down and people mainly in the media, are quickly trying to attribute this to Russia. While we do not know if UNC Dark Halo is Russian based, um, there is a lot of tension growing between the United States and Russia. And with the new incoming administration, cybersecurity is likely going to be a cornerstone of their agenda, which could um, very well bring more attention to the threat landscape when it comes down to nation states. So, in general, everybody needs to kind of be on the lookout going into 2021. Seems like the news isn't really covering so much as the cyber criminals are covering the nation state criminal. So, and just something to be aware of.
Good stuff, Daniel. So that brings us to the end, and that's actually the resources and the summary. I will post all these resources in the comments below under this movie. It will also be in the presentation. So just a quick recap. We talked about DNS over HTTPS, about reflection attacks, not re-election attacks. There were also
Yeah.
have to be careful with my typos though.
Gotta be real careful there.
Yeah, all the DNS attacks that can be used. The surging Bitcoin, the ransom DDoS, and the circle back tactic that we're now seeing, which might be related to the surging of Bitcoin value. Past the cookie attacks, what it does, why multi-factor authentication is still a good thing to have. But yeah, it's always on the weakest link in your chain. So just make sure that it's your security is balanced. If you have a really, really big door on your house that is massively big and cannot nobody can get through, but you leave your window open, well, yeah, that's not really good security, is it?
Yeah.
So
Not
so
at
you have to balance all the pieces of your security chain. Make sure that the weakest link is not the easiest one to attack. Then we talked about the SolarWinds. We did not talk about FireEye, but the FireEye, yeah, the red team tools were stolen. But those, the ones that we know about and that they communicated, they listed out all the CVEs. So go look up the threat advisory. We have all the CVEs that FireEye provided that were being leveraged in their red team tools. I hope it's all of them that it was true. But we have mitigation set up for that, and we have all the CVs. So go look in the advisory, and you will find them there, and then you know what to expect from those stolen tools. But it's much like the Cobalt Strike framework. The attackers could use it as a second level. So once they're inside, they download the Cobalt Strike. Well, they could download the FireEye Red Team tools, which is probably what they were interested in the first place because that's what they tried to extract and that's how they got caught. So they got not so they were not so careful. They wanted that information and that's how they got caught.
I think that's a really risky exfiltration there, to be honest. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. That's like the ex exfiltrate exfiltrating the crown jewels of what is a security organization that is specialized in the area of those things. Yeah, that's like
yeah,
yeah, that was not that
that's
smart.
asking for trouble.
Yeah. Well, luckily for us, at least we know they're there.
Yeah.
Now, that said, it might look like the attack of the century, but the century is still young, only 21.
I
But
don't know if that's a good thing to say there.
yeah, we already got used to a lot. But that
Yeah.
said, don't think that it's so exceptional that you find a backdoor in your systems. I'm pretty sure there's so many backdoors out there that never made public or come to light. I just hope that with this SolarWinds, people start to think about it and people start to do more forensics and more logging and more paying attention to behavioral and we might find actually much more things. I just hope it's not becoming Pandora's box like with the IoT. Remember what happened after the Dyne attacks? Everybody said, "Oh, they used IoT cameras. Let's go search IoT." And all the vulnerability researchers went onto those IoT devices. We opened Pandora's box because everybody found a vulnerability. The attackers were abusing it, and it was an explosion of activity and botnets and all the bad things
Yeah.
came from that. So I just hope it's not going into that direction. But I know that when we focus on something, more things come to light and more of the and more stories are coming out. So I'm expecting to see more of that going through this year.
I'm really hoping for every cut we get, we know how to patch it and fix it. And we stop bleeding on other things. You know,
Yeah.
it's you hope that we can take the beating and we can learn from it. But unfortunately, like you said, with the IoT situation, we're still dealing with the effects. So, you know,
Yeah. Yeah, it can be a long patch.
yeah,
So and then yeah, the politics of course, the FSB that warns against US, the US that warned against
wars against the Russia. So,
Russia.
yeah,
Yeah. That will be the game that will be played going forward. So anyway, thank you very much for joining us. We're at the end of this month's show. So next month we will be back. Hope you liked it. I know it was a long one again with lots of information, and we have been freewheeling left and right. And yeah, we might have lost your attention for 5 minutes left or right, maybe. But if you're looking on demand, it's easy. You can scroll forward anytime. I will put all these links down below. Make sure to subscribe to know when we come back. Typically, we come with our live the last Thursday of the month. So be on the lookout. Last Thursday of the month. I announce it on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Daniel does the same on his social. And that also when you're subscribed, you will get a notification that this is coming up. So thank you very much. Daniel, thank you very much. You still look good.
thank you
Much.
for having me again.
So see you next time. Bye bye.
Yep, take care.